Wiesel founded Forum 2000 for a purpose.
We have to use the past to not becoming our children's future.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be here, and I want to thank President Havel for convening another extraordinary gathering of Forum 2000.
So those people, they are peace, not kingdom, more seriously. And we should develop new ideas. And then important is implementation.
Dámy a pánové, vážení přítomní, já vás co nejsrdečněji vítám na konferenci Forum 2000.
The world is upside down. How should we put it back together? Are we able to act responsibly? Can we work together, play by the rules, and restore solidarity? Let's use this crisis as an opportunity. A new world emerging? Watch the online Forum 2000 conference, October 12th to 14th.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on wherever you are. Welcome to the second day of this year's Forum 2000 conference. As you have seen now a few minutes ago, yesterday's discussion were very interesting and dynamic. We had a number of very interesting speakers, among them President Tsai of Taiwan, Professor Garton Ash, President of the Czech Senate, Mr. Vystrčil. We had discussions about the potential of Africa. We had a discussion about human rights in China. We had a fascinating debate about climate change, a dialogue about populism in Latin America, both right and left. And today, I believe we have a program equally interesting on a number of other issues. We will be discussing the changing role of civic activism. We will be talking about the situation in Belarus with Foreign Minister Petříček and the leader of Belarusian opposition, Světlana Tsikhanouskaya. We will be discussing the growing global role of Asia. We will also be touching upon what is expecting us after the US presidential election, what is expecting us concerning the US role in the world. But before we start with the program today, we still have one more segment to show you and to share with you. We are not able to gather in Prague these days because of the global pandemic, but Prague has traditionally been the basis of Forum 2000. And it has also been, the city of Prague has also been a generous supporter. And also we are proud to say that the city of Prague shares many of the values of Forum 2000 Foundation. And the current Lord Mayor of Prague, Mr. Zdeněk Hřib, is one of the people in the Prague leadership who is very close in his worldview to what we in Forum 2000 believe. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce a very short interview by my program council colleague, Ms. Arzu Geibula, with Lord Mayor Zdeněk Hřib.
Zdeněk Hřib has been the, I hope I get this one right, the primator of Prague since 2018. For non-native Czech speakers, primator means mayor. What you also need to know is that Mayor Hřib has a knack for making power enemies, as one Politico article described him recently. And here's why. The same year Mayor Hřib joined the office as mayor, he refused to agree to a request from the Chinese delegation that called to dismiss the delegation from Taiwan. Not only did he not agree to that, but he scrapped the Czech's capital twin city agreement with Beijing, which meant opposing the One China principle, and instead formed one with Taipei, capital of Taiwan. He has visited Taiwan twice as a mayor in 2019 and 2020, but his connections with Taiwan actually goes back to 2005, to the time when he studied there as part of a study abroad program. Mayor Hrib has also been very vocal about China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims and for hiding the actual numbers of corona patients until it was too late to prevent the world from contracting it. In retaliation to his views, the Chinese government in 2018 had revoked the China tour of Prague Philharmonia. He has also voiced his support for Tibet on a number of occasions. He flew the Tibetan flag from Prague City Hall and revived the tradition where city and town halls in Czech Republic traditionally hang the Tibetan flag to mark their solidarity with Tibetan uprising against the communist Chinese regime on March 10th, which marks the Tibetan Uprising Day. He's also a strong supporter of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We share that in common. I've met His Holiness the Dalai Lama as well. More recently, Mayor Hrib was placed under police protection after being targeted by Russian hitmen. The attempted attack came after Mayor Hrib angered Moscow by renaming the square outside the Russian embassy in Prague after Boris Nemtsov, a prominent critic of Putin's government in Russia, as many of you know. Apart from having strong and often contradictory views on foreign policy matters with the current Czech government, Mayor Hrib is also very active in internal national matters. On the 20th year anniversary of the Czech Republic joining NATO, the mayor delivered a special message, both in English and Czech, on Czechia being the first country in the former Eastern Bloc to join the Defense Alliance on March 12, 1999, along with Poland and Hungary. He did that inside the Czech metro. He also unfolded the flag of the country at the new town hall building on Mariánské náměstí to celebrate this cause. It was his idea to commemorate this celebration by including Prague's public transport, as a result of which over 300 trams in Prague took to the streets with the flags of the nation and NATO. Mayor Hrib, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this interview.
Mayor Hrib, my first question is, given your stand towards the foreign policy and world events, why do you consider it important for the city of Prague to have a principled stance on issues like the ones I briefly listed, whether it's One China principle or Tibetan uprising and others that we simply don't have time to cover, unfortunately?
Well, first of all, I have to say we are primarily focusing only on the issues which are concerning the city of Prague. However, as Prague is confident and open-minded and progressive city, some of these issues are in touch also with the foreign policy, because it is important to look outwards, to care about the state of affairs abroad. And naturally, this includes expressing concerns about human rights and anti-liberal tendencies around us, because it is important to keep speaking out on these issues, even after the intimidation from those we criticize.
Absolutely. And I personally remember from my time that I've lived in Prague a few times in my lifetime, I always sense this connection with what is going on across the world. So thank you for keeping that on the agenda, keeping the rest of the world on the agenda. So my second question, how do you see the legacy of Václav Havel affecting how Prague relates with the rest of the world, to the rest of the world?
Václav Havel was undoubtedly very important for improving the reputation of Czech Republic and Prague abroad, and his name resonates still in the world. On the other hand, the legacy of Václav Havel is rooted in a different historical, cultural, political context. So it is therefore crucial to have our own agenda, reflecting the third decade of the 21st century. And we should also aspire for the world to see Prague as a modern city with current and progressive standpoints, which can improve the current issues and set the right direction towards a sustainable future.
I certainly wish you much luck in that direction and on that path. María, this would be my last question. I wish there was more time, but this would be my last question to you. As you mentioned, Prague it's a multicultural metropolis, highly connected with the rest of the world. The city has been affected by the pandemic in many ways. I'm reading growing numbers of new infected patients. How do you see Prague and its position in the world after COVID, after this pandemic is over?
Well, the current pandemic certainly poses a huge challenge for the economy, for tourism, cultural events, and education, and it definitely limits the connections with the rest of the world. However, I see the current situation also as an opportunity to focus on innovations. For instance, in the area of digitalization, in organization of work or education or sustainable and green projects. We also have an opportunity to tackle some negative issues of the pre-COVID era, for example, like over-tourism in case of Prague. And I believe that if we manage to implement sophisticated and well-targeted innovations, the future position of Prague in the world can be even stronger than before.
I wish best of luck for that, for all the work that's in the process and for all the work that needs to be done. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us for this interview.
Thank you very much, and bye.
Bye.
So thank you, Arzu and Mayor for that. It's nice to hear so much optimism. We've heard yesterday a lot of optimism in the panels, and now from Zdeněk Hřib as well. We will all, of course, get through this crisis and hopefully get through in a better shape and stronger. With that, I would like to conclude this quick opening session, and in a moment we will continue with the first panel on civic activism. Welcome to the second day of the Forum 2000 conference.
The world is upside down. How should we put it back together? Are we able to act responsibly? Can we work together, play by the rules, and restore solidarity? Let's use this crisis as an opportunity. A new world emerging? Watch the online Forum 2000 conference, October 12th to 14th.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this session on activated citizens. My name is Richard Youngs. I'm a senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, working on Carnegie's democracy program, and it's my pleasure to be sharing this short session. The aim of this session is to examine more closely what we all know has been an unprecedented wave of pro-democracy protests around the world in recent years, and to assess how effective these protests have been, what lessons we can learn from them, how they may be made more effective in the future, and how they relate to some of the broader political trends that Forum 2000 is focusing on this year. My first job as chair is to apologize because we've had some connection difficulties. In theory, we've had an excellent panel to lead us through these issues. We have Mikuláš, of course, well known in Czech Republic as chair until very recently of the Million Moments for Democracy movement. My Carnegie colleague, Maha, Yahya, who's director of the Carnegie Middle East Center, based in Lebanon, and following the very tragic and politically explosive events there very, very closely. And we were hoping to be joined by María, Corina Machado, of course, very prominent opposition leader in Venezuela, but we think she may, for technical reasons, be unable to join us. Maybe she'll be able to call in a bit later. But at least with Mikuláš and Maha, we have two people from different perspectives who've been following and involved in some of the most prominent, well-known protests of recent years. My first question to both of you is, you obviously come from countries where the impact of protests has been quite different. How has your experience of the last 2 or 3 years, has it made you more optimistic or less optimistic in the role that activated citizens can play in prompting democratic change? Mikuláš, perhaps we'll hear from you first of all.
Okay, thank you, and hi to everybody. I would say definitely yes, I'm more optimistic because in the last 2 or 3 years, we in the Czech Republic witnessed something special and extraordinary. Especially last year, 2019, we've seen something that nobody expected, because exactly 30 years after World Revolution, people started to activize and to speak loudly what they are thinking about politics. We are witnessing a serious crisis of democracy in our country. Our prime minister is criminally prosecuted in very huge conflict of interests. He is kind of oligarch and owning a quite important media house in Czech Republic. And he also tried to get the justice under his control. And that was the breaking point where people said to themselves, now that's really serious, and we must stand up and say no to this thing that is happening. And we were surprised that week by week last year, every week more and more people came to the streets and to the squares, not only in Prague, which is the capital, but also in hundreds of towns and villages across all the country. In the peak, it was 313 places protesting against this acting of prime minister, and the result was for me personally was really huge, because 300,000, that is 3% of our population, fulfilled the biggest public space in our country, the Letenská plain, very big plain in Prague, which has strong associations with the year 1989, and the whole nation saw that there are really many people that are dissatisfied with what's happening, that are active and trying to say, hey, this is not normal, and you shouldn't do everything. And this happened again in the autumn, on the 16th of November, when it was a second time when these people fulfilled this biggest plan again. And I think that it was really a strong message to all politicians that yes, it's true that you were elected in democratic elections, but you cannot do everything what you are trying. There are some rules that you cannot break, and I think it's really important, because now they know that these people are still ready to go to the streets when it's necessary.
Thanks. So it's kind of set a limit, a red line in a way. Maha, same question to you. I guess it sounds strange to be asking about optimism in Lebanon at the moment, but you've been following very closely and analysing the protests in Lebanon that have been happening on and off now for quite a number of years. It seems to someone from the outside that they've not been completely without impact. Do you still hold hope that these kind of mobilizations can unlock the impasse in a country whose politics is as complicated as Lebanon's?
Hi, Richard. Thank you for having me on this panel. In response to the question of whether I'm optimistic, I would quote Emil Habib, the Palestinian author, and say I'm an opti-pessimist. As you rightly pointed out, these demonstrations have been going on for quite a few years. What we saw, though, in the past year, over 2019, was quite unprecedented for the history of Lebanon in terms of the range of people who were on the street, the breadth of the demonstrations. As my colleague on the panel was just mentioning, I mean, we saw demonstrations across towns and villages in Lebanon. And for the first time, you saw people demonstrating against, as you know, Lebanon is composed of 18 religious different sects. All the political parties in Lebanon have a sectarian identity, a religious sectarian identity. So what we saw for the first time is that people were taking to the streets not only to demonstrate against the government, but they were also demonstrating against their own political/sectarian leadership, which for Lebanon is quite unprecedented. The sense that enough is enough, that this power-sharing system has actually been used and abused by this elite, and that nobody really has won. Actually, it's been an equal opportunity abuse for all Lebanese, and the ones that have won are the political leadership themselves. Now, has this accomplished anything? I would say that, especially in the past year, yes, it's accomplished a lot. And yet it's also proven, I think the system here in Lebanon has proven to be far more resilient and the leadership has proven to be far more resilient than anybody ever imagined. The demonstrations last October, actually in a few days, on October 17th, it will have been already 1 full year since the beginning of the Octobers last year. And what has been accomplished this year? They brought the first government down, managed to win a few elections here and there, including the election of an independent candidate to the post of the Lawyers Syndicate. We're seeing the impact in terms of people shedding this sectarian political party line and running on independents. In university 2 days ago, all the independent candidates at the Lebanese American University won. So we're seeing a shift, particularly amongst the younger population. The problem is that this is happening at a time, and maybe because Lebanon is going through a fundamental and a profound triple economic and financial and banking crisis, one that has gotten to the country to the point where more than 50% of the population is now below the poverty line. Hundreds of thousands of businesses have closed. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs. Thousands of businesses have been closed. And the Lebanese lira has lost close to 80% of its value. So the economic decline, this is all pre-COVID. With COVID, economic decline has been aggravated considerably. And the central bank, which should have been able to step in with support, has not been able to, because it is contributing to the national debt, to a public debt of around $100 billion. What is remarkable in all of this is, A, the persistence of the protests. Their Achilles heel is the fact that they're not unified. So you have a lot of multiple protests under the same umbrella of global, the October protests. However, the resilience, they're operating against a political machinery that even after an explosion, even after the country's been brought to its knees economically, it's literally, the economic deterioration now is exponential. We're in a hyperinflation mode. And yet the political elite are still there and they're still bickering. There's a massive explosion that hit the capital, Beirut, destroyed close to half the city. 300,000 people are displaced, 200 injured, more than 200 injured, more than 200 killed and 6,500 injured. And yet they're still there. They are still there. And they're still negotiating, and they're still trying to figure out how to preserve their vested interests in a system that is crumbling and collapsing underneath us as we speak. So the question you asked me about optimism, I have a lot of optimism in the sense and faith in the sense and the resilience of people, and I've grown to not like this word, but at least in the sense that people are still fighting back, saying this is our country, we have to reclaim it. The movement has changed significantly, and we can talk about this maybe a little bit later. Over the past year, it has seen a lot of transformations. Now attempts are trying to come up with a unified front. And yet it's met with an incredibly strong the sense of complete callous political leadership, one that would allow close to 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate to sit in the port of the city, in the heart of the capital, for 6 years. It's the same leadership that is now basically trying to do its backdoor horse trading as the country moves to a new government formation, which is desperately needed to get some financial support for the country, budgetary support. I mean, the needs are great. I don't know if this kind of begins at least for him to respond.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Absolutely. So, I mean, in a way, you both stressed that there have been protesters have made really impressive gains, Mikuláš, both in the size of the protests, and Maha, you emphasized the sheer persistence. That leads on to my second question, which it'd be interesting to hear from you both about how the tactics of the protests evolved. I think this relates to your question, your point, Maha, about efforts that are being made to unify the protesters behind a more coherent and uniform agenda. Obviously, that the movement in Prague and Czech Republic is been well known for using quite creative tactics. So, strikes me for many years we've been talking and worrying about the way that regimes have clamped down more effectively against democracy protests, but at the same time, protesters themselves have begun to respond to that and think through new tactics and more creative ways of protesting in order to stay away from the very entrenched elite tactics that you were talking about, Maha. So just talk through for us how you think protesters have learnt new tactics, what kinds of strategies they've taken on in order to try and be more effective in the way that they mobilize. Mikuláš, perhaps to you first of all again.
Okay, so I think there are plenty of things I can mean. The first, I think that it's necessary to have a concrete common goal, to formulate what's bad and what are you against. I think it's much more easy to gather people against something than just for something. But you also need to be constructive, not only destructive. So you must have some also positive formulations. What are you trying to reach for? For us, I think the most important thing to realize was that we need to create the greatest possible social majority we can. Because we know that really many people in our country is not satisfied with what's happening, and we just need to connect them and bring them together on the squares. And what was our tactics? It was that our events and our protests had to be creative, interesting, and also peaceful, non-violent, and I would say kind and positive, because our tactics was when somebody take part in the protest and he likes it and he see, well, hey, it's good and it's clever. So another time he can take 1 or 2 or 3 his friends with him, and the protests are getting bigger. And we saw that this is quite effective tactics, because many people are not used to speak publicly or protest against something. And in the beginning, they are suspicious. Can I go there? They are a bit afraid if it is not dangerous. And if they have the positive experience, they come next time, and they come there. They take their friends together and they share the pictures on the social networks and so. And the protests are getting bigger. So I think that's first lesson. The second lesson is that you have to try to find some balance and have the movement very colorful. So we were putting the stage for the young and old, for men and women, for people from different regions and professions. Some a bit left on the left side of economics, some on the right side, some progressive, some conservatives. And if it's colorful, everybody know that your aim and your goal is bigger than just it's not just for the young or for the man. And I think that's another important lesson, that it must be acceptable for quite many social parties. One very lucky step showed to us, it was when we tried or we decided to rotate week by week protests in capital city and in village and towns across the country. It was really a huge symbol, because when people from all the country came to the capital, to the Prague, to support the common goal, now everybody saw that that's not just the matter of some liberal elites, but of the whole country. And it was really strong, and everybody was encouraged by this symbol. And maybe the last thing I can mention is that at this time you can use really strong power, and this power is named internet and social networks. And you have quite many online tools you can use. And for example, Google Drive, Google Maps, Google Forms, Google Sheets. These are really powerful tools, and you can organize and manage quite a huge structure with these very simple tools. And also Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and social networks were necessary to have a channel we can communicate with people and formulate our demands. So these three steps, I think, huge social majority, non-violence, positive tone of the protests, colorful diversity on the stages, and a massive using of online tools were our tactics.
Maha, the rubbish collection protests in Lebanon are often used as an example of particularly colourful and creative protests. How have these tactics developed in Lebanon, in your case?
Thank you, Richard. Actually, I mean, the protests have gone through a number of transformations since last October. In October, when they began, they resembled a bit the protests, the Youth Think movement in 2015, which were around the garbage collection. So there were lots of creative tactics initially. I mean, the protests went on for 2-3 months, from October till December. January, I mean, where you had a feeling almost of a protest, but also a festival. There was museums, institutions. This came later, actually. There were. Hello?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
You froze for a minute,
Okay.
Maha. Yes, we can.
Sorry. chain. They did the revolutionary bus where they went from the north of the country to the south. They did, for example, a civil opposition a civic parade was organized in Beirut to celebrate Independence Day, where rather than military units, it was the Red Cross, it was the civil defense, it was the engineers, the architects, the doctors. I mean, these were the groups that were on parade. And it was all organized by citizens. It was a civic initiative. They created these themes. There was a women's march, protests for professionals. Even within the protest movement, we saw the emergence of informal syndicates, countering the formal ones, which have been hijacked by the political elite for a long time. The diaspora, the link between the diaspora, the Lebanese diaspora, which is quite significant, and those inside the country was quite high. A lot of the diaspora were funding, a lot of the initiatives actually were being funded by Lebanese living outside, but wanting to kind of see a change. These more light, not light, but light in the sense of fun kind of protests. What we also saw, for example, were debates. I mean, I've never seen this country consumed by public debates and the way it was during that period. You would go down to Martyrs Square in Beirut and you would have at least 6 or 7 or 8 debates happening in different corners, organized by different groups. And you go to other towns across the country, to Tripoli, to Saida, to Zahra, but here it was the same story over and over again, debates and discussions everywhere. Now, as we moved into winter and COVID started, just 2 more things quickly. As we moved into winter and COVID started taking hold, what we saw was the protests becoming more violent as the economic situation deteriorated more. We saw more people on the street conducting, taking it out on public property, altercations between the police and the protesters. Some of the protesters became more violent, or not violent, but became more confrontational. So they started occupying ministries, for example, which were similar to things they'd done in 2015. They made it clear to politicians that they were not welcome in public places. Now, all of this are still tactical. These are all tactical level issues. Where we are today is that there has been a concerted attempt, and it continues, to try and create broad coalitions out of these multitude of groups that have emerged as a result of the October 2019 protests. There are hundreds of movements or small groups that have emerged. We're seeing new political parties being formed. People have gone from politics is a dirty thing, which is, I think, another positive sign, I would say. Politics is dirty and we don't want to be part of a political system, to recognizing that the key way to change is to actually form political parties, credible political parties that span sectarian and national lines and that people can engage in. There's now an attempt to create an opposition front between the different groups, and I can talk about this in the follow-up.
So if I may, I'll just interrupt you there, Maha, because that leads on to 2 very good questions we have from the audience, and I think I'll finish with this because we only have about 4 minutes left, which asks precisely this question, Maha. How do we move beyond the protests themselves to widening the impact in terms of linking the protests with other areas of politics and generating areas of opportunity moving beyond the protests themselves? Mikuláš, I know that speaks very directly to your own personal experience and what your plans are. So let's hear from you. You both have to be reasonably concise on this because I think we get cut off automatically after about 4 minutes. Mikuláš?
Okay, so two things. First is that our tactics was make interest for public affairs cool again. It must be interesting, it must be funny, it must be kind, and people are spontaneously sharing it to the friends, to the people around, and they are active. For me personally, I shifted from the role of activist in the way that Maha mentioned. I realized that if I'm not satisfied with any political party here and I cannot identify with it, maybe I can try who are seeing it in the same way and to try to change it in the political way. So now we are starting a political movement, and we will see if we will be lucky and if there will be demand in our society to something new. But for me, it's really necessary to think not in the second plan, in long term, what is needs to be done and what can be done for it.
Maha.
Well, activating, I mean, to influence and to have basically push for change, there needs to be a link. I think all sorts of actions are needed. What we're seeing today, as I said, is the formation of new political movements that are able to run. Parliamentary elections are coming up in 18 months, so that are able to run in these elections, preparations for independent candidates. That will be fielded by the opposition movements. But I think also what has been in the interim, what has been interesting is trying to win seats, as I said, in university elections, in syndicates. The win at the syndicate of lawyers is really significant, particularly because this lawyer won with not only independent voices, but also voices that went against the instruction of their own political leadership. So in Lebanon, unfortunately, trade unions have been hijacked, but the creation of alternate trade unions have already been happening. The judiciary is incredibly important. So working with the judiciary to push through not only legislative change, but also to safeguard the fundamental rights of citizens is quite important. And these are all tactics that we're seeing happening on the ground here in Lebanon. They still haven't consolidated into a massive push for change. But I think that the wins are small, but they're significant, and each win brings us closer to the goal.
Okay, it would have been lovely to carry on talking to both of you, but I think at this point we get cut off. So I thank both of you for taking the time for sharing your expertise and experience with us. It would have been important and interesting to hear about the state of play in Venezuela's protest. Unfortunately, we were defeated by the technology. But I think Maha and Nicholas have given us both sufficient food for thought. What I learned was there's been a lot of creativity in terms of the protests themselves, but also some very important, significant thinking about how protests can link into mainstream politics, other areas of political activity, the kind of issues that other panels in this conference have been thinking about. So the clock is running down. We'll leave it there. Thanks to everyone for joining us. And that's all from the three of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Nicholas. Bye-bye.
Thanks.